I'm Peter Barber. I'm a fellow of the Society, but I also used to be responsible for maps at the British Library. And what I'll be talking about is a particularly fascinating atlas, which is which has until now been relatively little known to the Society and certainly to the wider world. It's called a Derrotero, which means it's a route-finding manuscript. It's Spanish. It dates from the late 17th century, but the origins of roteros go back to about 150 years earlier. And their distinguishing feature is that they show coastlines. They show a whole succession of coastlines because, certainly in the southern hemisphere, the sun was usually out, and if you were in a boat, you could actually see the coast. So by looking at the coast and seeing the peculiarities, you knew roughly where you were going, whether you were heading in the right direction. And the text gave you instructions about the length, the distances between different places, and you also got information about where you could cast anchor. This came in the form of a cross. So these manuscripts are actually quite simple. You get a sketch of the coastline, you get notes about distances, and you're told where you can anchor. And if it were as simple as that, the manuscript would hardly be worth looking at. This is something that's rather special. It's clearly a presentation copy. We don't know who it was made for. On the title page there's a dedication to the Virgin Mary, but we do have a clue, and that comes in the form of two Maltese crosses. And we know that they were intended to be Maltese crosses, and the Maltese crosses were of course the symbol of the Knights of St. John, who by that time were stationed in Malta, but they had branches all over Europe, and the members of the order tended to be extremely wealthy. So it's possible that this particular copy was made for a very influential Knight of St. John, but we don't know that for certain. What we do know is that it is far more decorative than it would need to be if it was simply being used on board ship. So this is meant for consultation at home and possibly consultation in the library. If you go through it, you will see the most beautiful depictions of volcanoes, of towns, of forts, particularly close to straits where there was a danger that the enemy might come through. And the Derrotero covers the whole of the coastline of Spanish America, or the western coastline of Spanish America. So it goes from California in the north to the Straits of Magellan in the south. But what is particularly interesting about it is that if you go to the title page, you'll see that it was made in Panama in 1669. Now this is really very interesting, because in the following year, the pirate, Sir Henry Morgan, or he was then just plain Henry Morgan, went from Jamaica supposedly in defense of Jamaica, but really in search of booty. He went across the Isthmus of Darien and raided Panama. And he left Panama with a Derrotero made in Panama in 1669. And that much we know, because in the following August, he presented this copy. This is August by now, 1671. He presented a copy to the governor of Jamaica, Sir Thomas Lynch. And Sir Thomas Lynch sent this copy to London, where it was received by Charles II. Now, we know that in 1677, a copy of a Derrotero made in Panama was in the hands of the Earl of Bristol, and that afterwards, a few years afterwards, it came into the possession of a chart maker, one of the leading English chart makers, called Joseph Moxon. We also know that at about this time, a copy, a Derrotero, made in Panama in 1669, was owned by the secretary of the Committee of Trade and Plantations, a guy called Blaithwaite. Now, this atlas is now in the Huntington in California, and it's almost identical to the one here. So we're left with a big question mark. Is the Derrotero in the Huntington the one that was captured by Captain Morgan, or was it another one? And was this atlas the one that was captured by Henry Morgan, or is it another one? Unfortunately, we don't know the precise documented provenance of this atlas. All we do know for certain is that it came to the Society in the early 19th century. And at that time, there are really two possibilities. One of them is indeed that it may have been in the hands of an Old English family, one of whose descendants was a fellow of the Society who saw this, didn't think it fitted in his collections, and presented it to the Society. In which case, this atlas could well be the one that was captured by Captain Morgan. The alternative scenario is that this was picked up by an English fellow such as Lord Holland during the course of the Peninsular War at the beginning of the 19th century. And this sort of thing would have been available. But what we do know is that when this manuscript, or manuscript like it, arrived in England in the early 1670s, it was treated like gold dust. And why was it treated like gold dust? Because it appeared to provide the key to infinite wealth for Britain in the future. Until that time, the English had been excluded from all knowledge of the Pacific coastline of Spain's American Empire. This atlas not only gives you the coastline, it gives it to you in the greatest possible detail, bay by bay, house by house, town by town, volcano by volcano.